There are some episodes that you prepare with excitement, and then there are others that you prepare with the deep respect. This is one of those. Because today I want to talk about something that for many years was incredibly difficult for me to face. And before we begin, I'd like to ask you something. Listen to this episode with kindness, with care, and with respect. Because this is probably the most personal episode I've recorded so far. Not because I'm about to tell you every detail of my life. Some stories belong only to the people who live them, and that deserves our respect. But I do want to share some of the lessons my own story has taught me. Because if there's one thing I've learned is that every one of us has a story filled with joyful moments and people we've loved and places we'll never forget, but also mistakes, losses, decisions, decisions that we wish we could make differently. And maybe the value of our story has never been that it was perfect. Maybe its greatest value is simply that it's ours. Welcome to Sin Manual, No Playbook, a space where there are no perfect formulas and no step by step paths. Here, we talk about life as it is, with doubts, with mistakes, with moments of clarity, and others where we are in the middle just trying to understand what's next. This isn't a podcast to tell you what to do, it's a space to question, to feel, and maybe find your own answers, because at the end, no one gave us a manual, and still, we keep moving forward. All right, here we go. A few days ago, I received a birthday message. It came from someone who was once and actually still is a very important part of my life. And reading it was incredibly difficult. Not because it was written with anger, it wasn't. Not because it was meant to hurt me, it wasn't. It was difficult because, with remarkable honesty and incredibly calm, this person reminded me of a version of myself that truly existed. A version I'm not proud of today. And as I kept reading, memories began to surface. Decisions, attitudes, mistakes, moments I had spent years trying to leave behind. And there was something that surprised me. At no point did I feel attacked. It wasn't a message written out of resentment. It was simply an honest description from someone who knew a version of me that certainly no longer exists. And I think one of the hardest things we'll ever have to accept is realizing that we may have become a painful memory in someone else's story. That hurts. It hurts more than most people realize. Because none of us wants to believe that we've hurt someone, especially the people we love the most. As I continue reading, there was a moment when I kind of quietly said to myself, yes, that guy was me. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel shame for, for admitting it. I felt responsibility. There was no point in arguing, no point in defending myself or making excuses. Because when you look back with complete honesty, there are things you simply have to acknowledge. But the message didn't end there. And I think that was the part that touched me the most. Because in the very same way that it pointed out my greatest flaws, it also recognized how much I had changed. It recognized the person I am today. And I can begin to explain how much that meant to me. Because for a long time, I was afraid that people will remember me only the worst version of who I used to be. That day, I realized something. Recognizing that someone has truly changed is an extraordinary act of maturity. We live in a world where it's often easier to put people in a box than to look at them again. It's easier to say that's just who they are than to actually accept that maybe they are no longer that person. And that's when one simple question began to stay with me. A question that eventually became this episode. How much value does our story really hold? Not just the beautiful chapters, not just the memories that make us smile, but also the failures, the falls, the wrong decisions, the difficult conversations. Because whether we like it or not, every single one of those moments has helped shape the person we are today. And the more I reflected on that message, the more I realized I wasn't simply thinking about my past. I was thinking about the value of our story. That question stayed with me for several days. How much value does our story really hold? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that our story isn't made up only of the difficult moments. Again, our story is also built from the moments that still make us smile. It's that song that begins to play in like right away takes us back to another season of our lives. Or it's the old picture we find and when weren't even looking for it and for just a moment, we are not simply remembering what happened. We are remembering who we were, what we dreamed about, what kept us awake at night, the people who stood beside us, the ones who are no longer here. Our story is made of first jobs, first trips, first loves, and first heartbreaks. It's that teacher who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. That friend who stayed when everyone else walked away. The hug that came at exactly the right moment. But it's also made of goodbyes, losses, failures, the decisions we wish we could make again. Because a story isn't written only with the chapters we're proud of, it's written with all of them. There are people who spend their lives trying to erase certain chapters, as if tearing out those pages could somehow erase the pain. I don't believe that anymore. Because if I removed those chapters from my life, I would no longer understand how I got here. There are decisions I will absolutely change, words I wish I had never spoken, silences I wish I had broken, moments I wish I had handled differently. But I also understand that without those chapters, I probably wouldn't be the person I am today. For many years, I've carried a simple belief: everything we've done has brought us to where we are today. And I kept saying that to myself. But I think that for a long time, I saw that idea as a way to make peace with my past. But today, I see something more. Because if where I am today isn't where I want to stay, then the best way to shape my future is to make better decisions today. I can't rewrite the chapters that have already been written, but I still get to decide how the next chapter begins. And I think that's one of the most hopeful truths we can hold on to. Our story isn't over. There are still chapters no one has read. There are conversations that can still bring healing, dreams that can still begin, people we haven't met yet, choices that can still change the direction of an entire life. Let me ask you something. When you think about your story, what comes to mind first? A memory that makes you smile? Or a chapter you still struggle to look at? Whatever your answer is, I want you to remember this. That chapter has value too. The beautiful moments teach us gratitude. But more often than not, it's the difficult ones that teach us how to grow. Maybe the real value of our story isn't found in choosing which chapters to keep. Maybe it's found in discovering the meaning within every single one of them. Because in the end, every one of us is still writing our story. There came a moment when I realized that fighting my story was never going to change it. I could spend years explaining why I made certain decisions. I could point to my circumstances. I could blame other people. I could convince myself that life had simply happened to me, but none of it changed a single page of my story. One day I asked myself a question that was as uncomfortable as it was necessary. What part of all this is actually my responsibility? That question kind of changed my life because for the first time, I stopped looking outward and started looking inward. That was the beginning of the greatest transformation I've ever experienced. Little by little, I stopped blaming my circumstances. I stopped blaming other people. And eventually, I stopped seeing myself as the victim of my own story. Not because everything had been my fault, that wouldn't be the true either. Life is rarely that simple. But I realized there was one part that belonged to me, and that was the only part I actually had the power to change. Accepting that was incredibly painful because it meant admitting that some of the people I loved the most were also the people I had hurt the most. Even today, those words are difficult to say because none of us wakes up in the morning thinking, today I want to hurt someone, especially not our parents, our children, our partners, our closest friends, the people who have loved us the most. And yet, sometimes that's exactly what happens. We make poor decisions. We allow pride, fear, immaturity, or ego to speak louder than wisdom. And before we realize it, we've hurt the very people we wanted to protect. I believe one of the hardest moments in anyone's life is standing in front of yourself with nowhere left to hide. No filters, no excuses, no explanations, no need to prove that you were right. Just the courage to look in the mirror and quietly say, yes, I was wrong. Strangely enough, that wasn't the moment I became weaker. It was the moment I became free. Because ego always has another excuse, another justification, another reason why it wasn't really our fault. But peace began to find me the day I stopped defending myself. The day I accepted that my story was also written with mistakes. After that, another journey began. A journey I don't want to explore too deeply today because it deserves an entire episode of its own. It was the journey of forgiveness, learning to forgive myself, learning to ask others for forgiveness, and eventually learning something I had resisted for a very long time. I cannot force anyone to forgive me. That decision doesn't belong to me. For years, I carried the weight of waiting for other people's forgiveness, as if my future depended on it. Until one day I finally understood I can take responsibility, I can apologize, I can change, but I cannot choose how someone else heals. That choice is theirs. And something unexpected happened. The moment I let go of trying to control what wasn't mine to control, some relationships began to heal. Maybe the healing had already begun long before, but my guilt was so overwhelming that I couldn't see it. Today, when I look back, I don't see an enemy. I see a guy who still had a great deal to learn, a guy who needed to fall, who needed to take responsibility, who needed to discover that our story doesn't change when we denied what happened, that our story begins to change the moment we choose to live differently because of what happened. And maybe that's the greatest lesson my past has ever taught me. Not that I could rewrite it, but that I could decide who I would become because of it. After reading that message, one question wouldn't leave my mind. If I have changed, why is it so difficult for us to believe that other people can change too? And I am not just talking about myself. Think about someone you've known for a long time. Maybe they were impulsive. Maybe they were selfish. Maybe they made decisions that hurt the people around them. Now ask yourself something. If that person has done the hard work, if they've learned, grown, accepted responsibility, and become someone different, will you still see them the same way you did 10 years ago? Or maybe, here's an even harder question. Will you want people to judge you for the worst version of yourself? Will you want every mistake you ever made to become your permanent identity? I don't think any of us would answer yes. Deep down, we all hope that one day people will recognize who we've become. So, why is it sometimes so difficult to offer that same grace to someone else? And I want to be very careful here. Recognizing someone's growth doesn't mean excusing the pain they caused. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. Because something did happen. People were hurt. Trust was broken. Tears were real. Consequences were real. Some wounds may never completely disappear. None of that should ever be minimized. But there's another truth that deserves our attention. People can change. We can learn. We can grow. We can become very different people from who we once were. Not overnight, not because we said we would, but because day after day, choice after choice, we decide to live differently. I've come to believe that recognizing someone else's transformation is also an act of love. Not a naive love, not a love that ignores the past, but a mature love that understands human beings are never finished. We are all still learning, still failing, still growing, still writing our story. Sometimes, without even realizing it, we become permanent judges of other people's life. We reduce them to one mistake, one season, one chapter, and we never stop to read the chapters that came after. Maybe that's one of the reasons real change can feel so lonely. Because after someone changes, they often discover that the hardest part isn't becoming someone new, it's convincing others that they already have. Reading that birthday message taught me something I'll never forget. That person didn't ignore my past, didn't soften it, didn't pretend it had never happened. It was acknowledged, it was named, it was seen for what it was. But then, the same person who reminded me of my deepest flaws also recognized my growth. The person I've worked so hard to become. And I realized what an incredible gift that truly is. Not because it made me feel proud, but because it reminded me that real change can be seen, even by those who knew us at our very worst. Maybe that's something we all need to practice a little more. Not forgetting, not pretending, but allowing room for redemption, allowing room for growth, allowing room for someone to become more than the worst chapter of their story. Because perhaps one day we'll all hope someone does exactly that for us. After everything, after reading that message, after remembering so many chapters of my life, I realized something I had never fully understood before. Our story never stops walking beside us. The only thing that changes is how we choose to carry it. For a long time, I felt my past was chasing me. It would appear in a conversation, in an old memory, on a special date, in a familiar place, or simply through someone who reminded me of who I used to be. And every time it happened, I felt as I had become that man all over again. Today, it's different. My past still shows up, but it no longer arrives like a ghost trying to frighten me. Now it comes as a reminder that I still have work to do, a reminder that growth is never a destination. It's a decision I have to make every single day. Because changing doesn't mean I'll never make another mistake. It means I respond differently when I do. It means I'm willing to recognize it sooner, to take responsibility, to keep learning, to keep growing. If I could sit down today with the man I used to be, I wouldn't hate him. I wouldn't try to erase him. I wouldn't pretend he never existed. I think I will simply say, hey man, you don't know it yet, but one day you will understand. You will fall. You will cry. You will carry guilt. You will wonder if you ever ruin everything. But if you find the courage to face your story honestly, that same story will eventually show you the way forward. That birthday message began as one of the hardest gifts I ever received. But in time, it became one of the most valuable because it didn't just remind me of who I had been, it reminded me that a story can contain deep mistakes, deep pain, and still continue writing chapters filled with hope. And maybe that's the true value of our story. Not that we lived a perfect life, but that we've had the courage to face it honestly, to be grateful for the beautiful moments, to learn from the painful ones, and to understand that everything, absolutely everything we've lived through has helped shape the person we are today. So don't spend your life dragging your past behind you. Don't keep carrying every mistake as stuff it still defines you. Not because those mistakes didn't happen. They did. But maybe they've already fulfilled their purpose. There's nothing you can do to rewrite yesterday. You can spend years imagining what your life might have looked like if only you had made different choices. But that's living inside a story that never existed. The only story that is real is this one, the one you are living today. And the next chapter hasn't been written yet. So if there's a part of your story that still feels heavy, let me leave you with one thought. Don't allow the worst chapter of your life to become the final chapter of your story. Because as long as you are here, there are still pages waiting to be written. And maybe one day you'll look back the way I did and realize that even the chapters that hurt the most had value because they brought you to this moment. And from this moment, you still get to decide who you want to become. And if something from this episode resonated with you, I'm so grateful. But if while listening, someone else's face came to mind, someone who is struggling under the weight of their own story, perhaps this episode was meant for them too. Because every one of us is writing a story. And every one of us deserves the chance to write a better chapter. Next week, I'd like to talk about the chapter that challenged me more than any other, forgiveness. Especially the forgiveness that no one else can give us. But that's a conversation for another day. So, if you made it this far and you stay with me, thank you. Thank you for giving me your time. And thank you for giving yourself this moment. I'll see you in the next episode, and remember, everything is going to be okay.